We have several interesting statements coming out from the leaders of Europe, among them Macron of France and Merkel of Germany, about this impending Afghan refugee wave that's coming to Europe. And what's interesting, curious about these new statements is that they are radically different than from the last time around in 2015. These nation leaders who would previously lead the EU and thereby Europe in taking in as many Syrians as possible to Europe have now completely changed the way that they address this issue. It might not actually only be because of the shifting sentiment all across Europe on immigration, because as I'm about to show you, NATO is warning that terrorism could be on the rise again if we don't handle this correctly. Welcome to the channel, guys, and thanks for joining me as we are going to take a look at these statements and what they mean for Europe as a whole. Both Macron of France and Merkel of Germany have radically changed the way they address this issue of immigration in public recently. So this is interesting. Take a look at this. France's Macron promises robust EU response to possible migration wave out of Afghanistan. Macron warned that Europe cannot alone assume the consequences. So the only problem I have with the title here is that it says possible, and at this point I think it's impending, like it's just a matter of time before the migrants come to Europe. In and of itself, those statements are not that radical, but take a look at this. He goes on to say, "We must anticipate and protect ourselves against significant irregular migratory flows that would endanger the migrants and risk encouraging trafficking of all kinds." So that's a significant change in language. We must anticipate and protect ourselves against significant. So already here, there's a change in the way he addresses this, a change in attitude. He's also talking in this article about working closer with these transit nations like Turkey. And by the way, Turkey is actually building a literal wall on the border to Iran, because that's where Turkey is anticipating most of these Afghan migrants are trying to come into Europe through Turkey, right? So Turkey is building like a 260-kilometer long wall on the border with Iran that will cover all of the Iranian border with Turkey. So it's not just the EU trying to effectively control this coming migrant wave. Turkey is doing its own thing as well. Macron ended with saying that we will do everything so that Russia, the United States, and Europe can cooperate efficiently because our interests are the same. So again, this is quite different, that he's specifically mentioning Russia, the United States, encouraging them to, at the very least, help out. So the United States has already agreed to take in like 30,000 Afghans, but that's not a lot. That's not a big number for what some people are estimating can possibly migrate into Europe. That's not a big number at all, right? And that's the US, who's arguably responsible for, what I want to say, like 85% of what has happened in Afghanistan. So taking in 30,000 so far, which, by the way, this is ironic. These 30,000 Afghans that they've agreed to take in, most of them right now are held up in Albania and Kosovo in Europe, by the way, indefinitely, because the US don't have a way right now to take in all of these Afghan refugees. That's a bit ironic in all of this, but it does show that Macron wants to work closer. Instead of just saying that Europe will do everything they can, they're now using words like protect ourselves, and he's also saying that Russia and the US should do their part. This is his way of very politely saying that, right? Although I do question if, I don't think Russia is going to take in too many Afghans. I don't think there's a good chance of that. But he's appealing essentially to member nations of NATO, of the United Nations, of trying to get people more involved that are not within Europe. So there might be several reasons that Macron is changing his language on this issue. One of them is that he is facing an election year next year. And right now, without anyone really noticing it, 800 Afghan refugees have made their way to France. And this is quite surprising, because no one really expected any Afghans to make it all the way to France already, especially not unnoticed, right? Like, no one's really reporting it. Right now, that's not a good sign for him, right? Because last time around, France took in way too many Syrians, and it caused the people of France to be very much against this uncontrolled migration policy. The people in Europe are fed up with uncontrolled immigration. Controlled immigration might be another thing, right? Because it splits people more, like some are for, some are against. But uncontrolled immigration is a widely unpopular thing in Europe. And so Macron is facing a lot of pressure now to take action early on this time around, instead of like in 2015, where he just kind of like took things as they came. So he's also facing a lot of political pressure from the southern European nations, like Italy and Greece, because they're saying that if Turkey is successful in shutting down the border and not letting any of these Afghan refugees and migrants into Turkey and then let them into Europe that way, they will most likely take the same route as the Syrians in 2015 over the Mediterranean into southern Europe, up through Italy and Greece. And right now, that's a major issue. Remember that the economies of Greece and Italy were the big victims the last time around in the migrant crisis in 2015. So now the Minister of Migration in Greece is saying that we are clearly saying that we will not and cannot be the gateway for Europe for the refugees and migrants who could try to come to the European Union. Even Angela Merkel, who was a big proponent of the last immigration wave, is saying that this is primarily about helping neighboring countries to which the Afghan refugees may perhaps go. So all of these statements represent the sentiment growing in Europe that we can't take in like millions of migrants and refugees, at least not without radically changing the continent, and most people are not for that. Actually, right now, NATO is holding emergency meetings on this very issue, because they understand that if we can't vet all of these people coming into the United States, Europe and Russia, if they end up taking anyone in, we could be facing a whole new issue. So this former NATO official is predicting that terrorism is going to be on the rise again. In this article, he goes on to explain that everybody's been anticipating that. We know that Al-Qaeda is already well implanted. We know that foreign fighters are coming in. So NATO is going to have to anticipate eventually a shockwave of more terrorist attacks in the United States, Europe, and how we anticipate those, how we deal with those, how we try to foil them so that we avoid another 9/11 style spectacular. So in terms of national security, that's the main concern here for all of the EU and for the US as well. Think about this. We'll be taking in people whose country we've been bombing and then occupying for the last 20 years. We'll be taking in people who have probably, like young people who have grown up seeing the West as an occupation force over the last 20 years. You can have adults who only have known the West as an occupation force at this point. I think if we don't think that a few of those people will be radicalized and then use this migrant wave as a means to attack Europe and other places, I think we're being a little naive. Of course, the vast majority of these refugees will be good people, right? And blah, blah, blah. But man, I'm telling you, it's going to be very important that we have some kind of control over who comes into Europe. We don't want to go back to how it was like 5 and 7 years ago with these continuous terrorist attacks happening all across Europe. Like, we want to help people, but if there's a way to prevent that from happening, we have to do that. Interesting times. So tell me what you think about all of this in the comment section. No matter your opinion, all opinions are welcome. Thanks for watching. Have a great day, and I'll see you guys in the next video.